Hello guys, and welcome to another video, and we are just one day out from ExileCon 2023, and this video is going to be a bit of balanced discussion on the upcoming patch that is going to be League 3.22. Hopefully we're going to be getting all the reveals for that at ExileCon as well, likely during the 90-minute keynote right at the start of day one. And really this video is a little bit less speculative and more about what I'd like to see in the patch in terms of balance. I will of course speculate a little bit as to whether I think these things will actually happen, but if you'd like to actually go back and check out some predictions, then I've done a collaboration with Talkative Try for the 3.22 announcements. That was on this channel a few days ago, and you can head over to Talkative Try's channel as well for our predictions on Path of Exile 2 announcements. And so let's get straight into it. Patch 3.22, I think it's going to be quite a big one. I think there's going to be a pretty big meta shakeup. And one of the things that I really want to see in this patch is changes to fundamental melee gameplay. And that is in the form of changes to Ancestor Totem buffs. Now, I've talked about this quite a bit in other videos, and I think that a lot of people do agree with this. This is one of the things that's really annoying about melee gameplay, is that to achieve the most damage of the build when you're bossing, for example, you must have your totem buffs up all the time. If one drops off, or if both of them drop off, you are losing so much damage. And this is just an annoying concept. I think overall it's not a well thought out concept. And these Ancestor Totem buffs need to be removed from the totems entirely, and then those buffs need to be baked into melee skills at a baseline level. So what do I mean by that? Well, at a level 20 gem, the Ancestral Protector grants 20% more attack speed, and the Ancestral Warchief grants 18% more melee damage. Let's just say they both grant 20% more for the reason of just looking at these skills here. So if we're just to take Earthquake as an example, the damage effectiveness would instead be 180%, and the attack speed multiplier would be 90% if we baked in those buffs at a baseline level. And I actually think that the attack speed multiplier on melee gems needs a bit of a balance pass in general, even factoring out the Ancestral Protector buffs. I know what they were going for with slam skills. They kind of wanted them to be slow, hard-hitting abilities, but that just didn't really work out too well. And I think the original implementation of them back in Harvest, when they added all of these things like the Fist of War support and the Warcry buffs, this thing kind of worked, but then they took a lot of that away from the players, and so you were left with these kind of bare shells of skill gems that didn't really function correctly anymore. And as a result, things like Earthquake just feel really poor to play right now. They don't do very much damage. They don't feel very impactful like they should do. You know, when you drop a big Earthquake and it has that delay period and then it explodes, well, it should feel like you're doing a lot of damage with one single attack, but that's not really the case, and the damage effectiveness of this gem probably needs to be increased at a baseline level anyway. But the attack speed multiplier, if they're not going to fix that, I think that they need to really make that playstyle become a reality, where these slam skills deal a lot of damage, but they do hit very slowly, and that will really differentiate the difference between slam skills and strike skills, which as of right now doesn't really exist. And a lot of people are favouring more of the strike skills that just add flat damage to the attacks, as these are the ones that really feel good to play. You're able to get damage early on in your progression, things like Bone Shatter for example, that grants a massive amount of flat damage, and even some of the other strike skills that just grant flat damage to your weapon, and that way you don't need to have a fantastic weapon early in progression. And the other slam abilities that don't grant these flat damage portions, well, they've fallen behind a lot, because you know, you just have a problem here where you really do need a good weapon, and the whole playstyle of these abilities kind of lacks identity right now. I think they need to restore that slam concept if that's the direction that they want to go in, and I'd like to see that. So bake the Ancestor Totem buffs into melee abilities at a baseline level, and then I would like to see these totems reworked into pure attack totem skills. So Ancestral Protector and Ancestral Warchief reworked to be purely attack-based skills. They already do this quite well. Obviously, the Protector is very specialized at dealing a lot of damage to a single target. It can be modified to strike multiple targets. And the Warchief deals a little bit less damage, but it hits many targets at once. It's a giant area. And I think you can just modify these a bit to make them nice, impactful attack abilities. And then, of course, you would need to change Panopticon and the Dawnstrider unique boots. And I think these should have specialized totem modifiers that enhance the totem playstyle somehow. And, of course, Chieftain would need to be reworked. The Tukohama node in particular would need to be reworked, because right now, one of the biggest things on that node is that gigantic increase to Ancestral Totem buff effect. And I think Chieftain is going to be reworked anyway in this league. It's definitely one of the ascendancies that I see getting changes, along with a whole bunch of other ones. So I think that now's the perfect time really to do that. Will they do this? If somebody asked me, will they make these changes to Ancestor Totem buffs? Actually, I think they will do this, but I'm not sure if it will be in this league or whether it will be later on, perhaps in Path of Exile 2. I think that Melee has been in a place for a while now where it is a little bit clunky feeling, with totems having to keep dropping them, and, you know, they get one shot because you're not expecting to any kind of totem life or anything like that, so they just die. Yes, we do have the lingering totem buff effect mastery, but that is kind of a band-aid fix, so I don't think that they'll do it this league, but that's one of the things that I'm really hopeful for. And next up, something that I really want to see is some kind of enhancement or buffs for the blood magic archetype. And this problem is quite deep-rooted. It goes back to 3.16 when auras, specifically the defensive auras, were buffed. That's Determination and Grace. And these days you just see people running all of their mana for full reservation to reserve a bunch of powerful auras. And blood magic has fallen behind because of this, along with mana stacking as well, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But blood magic, it needs something on that keystone to make it more powerful, to make the playstyle more specific. As right now you just kind of stack a bunch of life. It's really only good for a few of these builds that stack tons of life and use like Blood Sacrament or something like that. And blood magic needs a little bit more. I'm not sure what exactly it needs on the keystone. It just needs something. Maybe it's some kind of powerful life recovery. Maybe it's even more life. You know, is 10% more life enough? I'm not sure. And it could be life reservation efficiency of skills as well. You could grant it a big portion of life reservation efficiency of skills, and that then opens up to some kind of petrified blood kind of thing going on there with a lot of life stacking. But right now, blood magic feels really, really bad. It's in a bad place, and I think that this would be helped out massively by another change, and that is moving some of the power away from Determination and Grace and putting it back onto Gear. And this is actually a problem that I think has been existent since 3.16, where these auras are a little bit too powerful, and Gear feels quite insignificant to an extent. There's this thing where you can kind of equip really any gear you want, and your auras are still going to solve your evasion and armor. And I think I would like to see it where a character that's wearing full armor gear really does get a lot of armor out of that, and then the aura is there to further boost it. Maybe these auras could be changed into 35% auras to match Discipline. And speaking of Discipline, I think that aura needs to be changed as well. That's in a really bad place. That needs some kind of buffs, but I'm not sure how exactly you go about that, because granting more energy shield, for example, or something like that, similar to the Determination and Grace auras, well, that would cause its own problems, so I don't think you can do that. And that's why Discipline is in the place that it is right now, is because it is quite hard to balance that skill, really. And I think if you changed Determination and Grace into 35% reservations, well, you'd be able to nerf them quite considerably, move a lot of that power over to the gear, and then you'd feel better for gearing a full armor character if you wanted to stack armor, for example, or you gain a bunch of evasion from wearing evasion gear, and you can boost that up a little bit with the reservations. This would go quite far into helping the blood magic and mana stacking archetypes, because right now there is so much power in auras, and so if you're able to move some of that power off of the auras and onto gear, I think that would be fine. In general, I don't see that this would actually nerf the builds that are reserving all of their mana for auras, because they'd still be getting the same amount of total armor or evasion from combination of their gear plus auras, but overall it's just going to help those other builds out a little bit, and I think that would be something really nice. Do I think they're going to do that? Really? I'm not sure if Blood Magic will get anything this patch. Blood Magic has been in a weird place for a very long time. Even before the changes in 3.16, it was in a weird place, and I'm not really sure they're going to do anything with blood magic just yet. But I think one of the problems of moving some of the power from Determination and Grace onto Gear is that they may not want to do this because of Ruthless. They've already talked about how the Ascendancies are too powerful in Ruthless, and moving Evasion and Armor onto Gear means that that gear is going to be more powerful in Ruthless. I mean, they could differentiate gear between Ruthless and the base game. I think they've already talked about doing that on Ascendancies, maybe actually changing it so the Ascendancies in Ruthless have different power level, they have different modifiers. It might just be numbers, but it could actually be different modifiers entirely. So I don't think it's completely out of the question that Ruthless actually begins to get its own balance passes and starts to actually get a lot of different things to the core game, and the core game goes in a different direction entirely. And so we could still see that sort of change coming in. I don't think it's too out there for something like that to happen. And obviously, as I was talking about blood magic, there's also mana stacking. Mana is in a bit of a boring place right now in the current game. It's kind of a thing where if you're not doing mana stacking, you just need to solve your mana costs of skills. And this is often done with the use of some modifiers on rings and amulets to make your mana costs lower. Maybe some other modifiers to give you reduced mana cost, some flask modifiers and things like this, or some modifiers that come in from timeless jewels. And some builds end up having 0 mana cost for everything, and they just ignore mana for the rest of that playthrough. And I think mana in general is quite boring right now. So this would be interesting if they're able to do this in a good way. I know that a lot of other creators like Zizaran have talked about this on their channel, and it's a thing that really not many games have done great. I think mana is really hard to get right. It's something where it's like an obstacle that you want to put in the way of these really powerful builds, something that needs to be solved. But it actually ends up feeling a little bit like a chore. You know, it's not something that you're really interested in solving. It's just another thing that you have to do, and you have to do it on every build. So mana in a bit of a weird place. Mana stacking, on the other hand, is quite weak right now. It's in the same place as blood magic. I'd say it's a little bit better than blood magic because there is still a little bit of archetype there with things like Ivory Tower. There are some powerful builds going on there, but overall, I think mana stacking is quite weak right now, purely based on the fact, just like blood magic, that you're not stacking auras, you're not getting all that power from auras. And so I think there could be some changes there. Are they going to do something for mana in this patch? I'd actually say making changes to mana is more likely than them changing things with blood magic. So I'd like to see it. I mean, I'd love to see some more support for mana stacking archetypes in the game. Maybe this patch, who knows? And lastly, I want to talk about Bleed and Ignite, specifically for attack-based builds, that is the Ignite. Obviously, Bleed is already specifically for attack-based, but we could see a possible Bleed overhaul in this patch, some kind of mechanic change, I'm not sure about that. Otherwise, we could also see Bleed just having its calculation changed like Ignite had a while back. And obviously, the changes I mentioned earlier with Ancestor buffs being baked into the melee skills at a baseline level, this would actually help out that, because right now, the more melee damage on Ancestral Warsheath does nothing for damaging ailments, but if you added that damage in at a baseline level and improved the damage effectiveness and attack damage scaling of these skills, it would affect damaging ailments, and so that would provide a little bit of a buff there. And this would also indirectly buff poison-based melee builds, of course, but a lot of those are projectile-based attack builds, and I do think that Vengeance Cascade is going to be nerfed in some way in this patch. Personally, I hope it gets a nerf where it only nerfs the damage of returning projectiles. I don't really like the idea of it nerfing the damage of all projectiles, or, you know, all damage that you deal. But, you know, Vengeance Cascade, it's a bit powerful right now. It's definitely too powerful, and I think I'd like to see them compensate a lot of those builds that will be nerfed by the Vengeance Cascade nerf. And I think they could just compensate them at a baseline level, improve the skill's damage effectiveness, bring them up a little bit, nerf Vengeance Cascade. That's the correct way to balance it. I think it's a healthy way to balance it for the game, and just make it so that it's a little bit more balanced across the board, because right now it's like, well, I pick up Vengeance Cascade and suddenly I'm dealing, you know, nearly double damage. And it would be nicer if you were dealing more damage before you got Vengeance Cascade on those bow builds, and then Vengeance Cascade was a great addition to your build to make you deal more damage, rather than just straight up doubling your damage, and it's the best in slot anoint that you can have. And I think that's fine, because Poison on attack builds or by any other means doesn't need help at the moment. Poison's just fine. But Ignite specifically from melee skills, and of course Bleed, both of those need help. They're in a place where they're just not that great. I think Ignite in general from non-melee skills is fine. There's a lot of skills that do great with Ignite, but we just need a little bit more support. I think maybe Chieftain might get some things for Ignite-based attack skills. There's also the Gladiator rework that is definitely coming, guys, surely, right? The Gladiator rework is coming, and maybe Gladiator gets some specialized things to do with Bleed. As I said in my other video before, I'd really like to see a node that grants you the ability to bleed with all of your damage types rather than just physical damage, so you can, you know, stack up a bunch of elemental damage and start bleeding with that. That would be great. And as I said, Bleed may get a change to its calculation, or it could receive a full rework, and that would be really interesting to make the mechanic different. I'm not sure if the mechanic actually makes sense right now. The way it sort of deals more damage while the target's moving is a little bit awkward, and if they do leave it as it is right now, I would love to see more ways to apply the debuff that the Ensnaring Arrow skill applies, where it counts targets as moving. We need that for melee. Melee must have that, because that's really weird that it doesn't. Right now it's just Ensnaring Arrow, and I remember the old days where you have to switch to bow to apply the Ensnaring Arrow on your Bleed EQ character. I did that back in Ultimatum. That's not a very fun playstyle, so we need that Ensnaring Arrow debuff to count targets as moving for melee skills as well. Maybe some kind of support gem that grants more damage with ailments or something like that, or more damage with Bleed specifically, and it has a chance to count targets as moving or something like that. But will Bleed actually get changes in this patch? I'm not convinced. I think that they might be just happy to put the Gladiator changes in and see what happens. I'm not sure if that's going to be enough, because I don't expect the Gladiator Ascendancy to magically be really, really powerful. But we will see, I suppose. We'll see exactly what they do with bleeding. And that's it. That's my things that I'd really like to see changed in this patch, and perhaps even in the future of the game, as I don't think all of these things are going to happen in this patch. Yeah, so I know this video's been a little bit of a ramble on these things. This wasn't scripted. This is just me kind of rambling on about different things that I'd like to see added to the game at some point. What do you guys want to see in patch 3.22? Do you want to see some specific changes to balance? Obviously, there's going to be very, very likely a lot of changes to Ascendancies. So there's that. There's the potential there that a lot of Ascendancies will get support for new archetypes, like we saw the trigger bots coming in on Saboteur, and of course the cooldown reduction. Perhaps other Ascendancies will get support for archetypes that they never had before. That's really, really interesting, I think, because you can start to see new builds popping up on those Ascendancies, the things that they had never interacted with before. And yeah, let me know if you guys want specific changes in the comment section below. And of course, you can stay up to date with this channel, as I'm going to be posting a whole bunch of stuff after ExileCon has gone live. Once we know all of the juicy information, I'll be breaking it down on this channel. If you want to stay up to date with all that stuff, you can join the Discord. The link is in the channel description below. And I want to do a big shout out to my channel members, of course. Thank you for your support. And yeah, if you've enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe to come back for more. And I will see you guys likely on the other side of ExileCon. I hope you guys all enjoy it. Whatever you're doing for ExileCon, enjoy the time, and I will speak to you guys soon.